Arcade Heroes.
Greetings, it's Adam with ArcadeHeroes.com, and in my video yesterday about how arcade operators make a decision on what kind of games they're going to put in their arcade, I had promised that my next video would be about arcade game design philosophies. However, I shot two different takes of that, and I guess I just wasn't really satisfied, and in thinking about it, it's like, I really need input from actual real-world arcade game developers to make this, I guess, have some weight. And so I sent out a bunch of emails today to different people that I know in the business, and including people like Eugene Jarvis, and looking for their feedback on it. Now, whether or not any of them will reply, I don't know. So if they don't reply after a while, then I'll just go with what I got. But if they do, then I will shoot a new video and integrate those thoughts into it. However, as I looked at the comments to that video this morning, I was quite happy to see a lot of your comments and feedback. And one of the comments touched on something that I mentioned briefly, but I figured, you know what, I could expand on that a little bit. And just because within the arcade business, classic games, retro games, still hold plenty of sway with people as far as, you know, things that they like to play and things that they may expect to see inside of an actual arcade. It's just, as I mentioned, unfortunately, a lot of retro games, at least with the business model that I use, tend to be filler. So the question is, can retro games work in a modern arcade? They can, it's just, it depends on your business model. So the company that probably personifies how it can work, the business model where it works, is the Retrocade, the Galloping Ghost Arcade in Brookfield, Illinois. Now, unfortunately, I've never been there myself. One of these days I will make a pilgrimage there. Talked with Doc Mack a number of times online, but again, never been there. But I am very aware that it's essentially the largest arcade in the world, and I believe 99% of their games you could consider retro. Of course, that's always a difficult thing to define. What is retro? Where's the line that you draw it at? And so I guess for the purposes of this video, I'll say anything before the year 2000. That was 22 years ago. And so I guess at this point, to help make you feel extra old, in case you're aged like me, then yeah, that's what we'll consider retro. Games from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And so there are a number of other arcades out there which use the retro game business model similar to Galloping Ghost Arcade. In fact, many of them were influenced by what Galloping Ghost did. And if you're not familiar with that, what it is they charge an entry fee and have all the games on free play. And I've also heard of bar arcades doing this, but with bar arcades, it's quite a mixture. Some bar arcades will just charge for drinks and put all the games on free play. Other ones will charge for the games themselves. And so it's just kind of all over the place. But in my type of business, I'm somewhat like a family entertainment center, like a Dave & Buster's or Round One USA. Just I don't have the resources, and I'm just an arcade. I don't have all these other attractions like, you know, laser tag and go-karts and all this other stuff that goes with these big FECs. And so in an arcade environment, how do these games really fare when it's still being a coin to play? And yes, I still use tokens, which I'm one of the few left that seems to be doing that, as everybody else switches over to card systems. But that's a discussion for a different video. So how do the retro games that I have actually fare? And what I'm going to do here will probably be called crazy by some, because I'm actually going to share numbers as to how certain games did in both of my arcade locations for the year of 2021. And again, these are annual numbers, cumulative, of what we pulled out over the year. Now, there are some caveats to the performance on these, especially with some of the retro games. There are instances where the games have failed, or there's something wrong with them, like the controls or something else about it, so they earn less when they're not in perfect working condition. Fortunately, these 5 games standing behind me have been working really well, knock on wood. Hopefully they continue to do so forever, but I know eventually something will fail on them. But to help you also understand where these fit and why I call them filler with the entire arcade, I'm going to also provide numbers on my best 5 games. Now, these are numbers from 2021. My best year in business was 2019, but I didn't have my second location yet. And of course, 2020 was an anomaly and hopefully never happens again. But so my top 5 games at this location, I'm in West Valley City, Utah. This is my original location. The top 5 for that year was Cruisin' Blast, which made a cumulative of $13,572. And then followed by Jurassic Park Arcade by Raw Thrills, also by Raw Thrills, I should say, with $12,874.50. And with the racing games, I only have 2 of them in those instances, and so I'm combining both into one for the earnings. It doesn't make sense to me to separate them out just because, I mean, I still do track them separately just so I can see how things are between each cabinet, but for these cumulative things, I'm just combining them into one. It's easier, makes more sense. Then we have Maximum Tune 5 by Bandai Namco Amusements at $12,661.75. The Walking Dead by Raw Thrills at $11,226.25. And then NBA Hoops, which is actually standing right here next to me, at $7,099.50. Now, one caveat on these is both of these games stopped working about November last year, and so missed the Christmas season, so the number would have been higher on these, and they're still out. It's been a real frustration on getting these stupid things to be fixed. But those are the top 5 for this location. For the location where I was standing at yesterday, the one with the blue walls, in Ogden, Utah, so House of the Dead Scarlet Dawn was my number 1 game at $9,031.50, and followed by Sega's Luigi's Mansion Arcade at $6,830 flat. And then for my third one, it would be Niran by Namco. Now this one, I have 4 of these, and so I am accumulating all 4 of them together since they are technically all the same game. And so that made $5,616.25. Followed by Daytona Championship USA by Sega at $3,916.75. This one would have been a little bit higher if the cabinets that I had were a little better quality. The monitor on both of them was not perfect. I also had a few problems throughout the year on them where they would crash and things, but Sega was very helpful in helping me get those back up and running. And then for 5th place was Step Maniacs by Step Revolution. And another caveat on this number is that I didn't have the game all year long, and so it would have been higher if I had it. I think I got it in like June or July of that year, so it would definitely be higher. But it's $2,686.75. So out of all those games, all of these are relatively new. They're not old games. And so because of that, that's where my focus tends to be on new. And so now let's get into the bottom 5. So for this location, my bottom 5 were Galaxian at $21.50 over an entire year. Now, caveat on that one, the game did die on me. I can't remember when. It might have been the end of the summer, and it was really frustrating because I could not tell what was wrong with it, and it might be a power supply issue. I still haven't figured it out, or it might be a monitor issue. I did all sorts of stuff on the monitor, did some stuff with the power supply, and it still doesn't work. But that's it. If it had been working, it would have been higher, although it wouldn't be competing with Cruisin' Blast, even if it was fully working. And then I had Armed Police Batrider, which is the game right here. Now, as you can see, I don't have an actual marquee because I don't think they ever made one for the States here, and it's also in the back of my arcade. Anything that gets put in the back tends to not do as well, but even if I had this straight up front, it wouldn't do dramatically better. But Armed Police Batrider by Rising did $35 last year. Assault by Namco and Atari Games did $45.50. That one's currently down. But also last year, there were a number of times where I had some issues with one of the joysticks. I have the original sticks on that one, and they're somewhat finicky. And as I mentioned in my video yesterday, sometimes proprietary parts, while they make the game cool, they can be a real pain to fix decades later when they fail. Then we have Pitfall 2 by Sega. That's right here. A lot of people don't know that this game exists in arcades. They're probably more familiar with the Atari 2600 version, but the arcade version, it's fun. It's tough as nails, but it's just one of those things that's kind of my personal preference because I grew up loving Pitfall 2, playing that game. That it is basically filler. It only made $59.75 last year. And I should also note all these classics are only at 25 cents. I know there are some places out there that charge like 50 cents or even I've heard 75 cents for a classic game. But for me, I'm still charging just the equivalent of a quarter. And then for my last one was Primal Rage at $64.50. That one also broke down sometime late last year, and so it hasn't been, it would have been a little bit higher, but on a week-to-week thing, when it was working fine, it was always my worst performing fighting game. Now for the bottom 5 up in Ogden, you'll also notice that these are all classics. So my worst performing game was Space Invaders by Taito, but the caveat on that one is that game also failed sometime in the summer last year. I've been trying to get it fixed, but it's been a real pain. I've replaced multiple components on the monitor, even did a new cap kit on the PCB itself, and it just still doesn't work, and so still got to figure that one out. But it definitely would have been higher than number 1 if it had been, or the worst performing game, I should say, if it had actually been working. But for second place was a game that didn't have any problems at all. It just didn't do well, and that's Crystal Castles by Atari from 1983. It only made $70.25 at that location. Then Dragon Saber by Namco, which came out in 1990, that only made $71, so 3 more tokens than Crystal Castles did. And both games are fantastic, but just people don't play them. And then we had Metal Slug 6. This one was a little low because there were some issues with the monitor and whatnot, but it only made $89 last year. And then there's a big gap, and then we have Gauntlet Dark Legacy by Atari Games, or it says Midway on there, but it was really Atari Games, where it made $180. And so, yeah, a lot of games week to week don't make a lot of money when they're this old, but there can be exceptions to the rule. It's just, as you probably got from my best performing games, that, you know, it's really tough to run a business like this, whether it's in a mall or a strip mall or its own building, where you're relying just on classic games. And when you do, you have to use a different business model, not tokens per play sort of thing, but the free play model that I mentioned previously. But if somebody has made it work out there, kind of doing what I do, but without any new games, and I'd be interested to hear how they did that exactly. But, you know, there are still some classics that, despite how old they are, they still do well. And so my best 5 classics at each location. We'll start again with West Valley here where I'm standing. The best performing classic was Street Fighter II Turbo. I have the Japanese version, the Super Street Fighter II X, and it made $1,074.75 at a quarter a play last year. So that's pretty good for a game that's that old. And then we have the Addams Family, the pinball machine by Bally Williams. That was $1,083 flat, and that one has had a few technical issues last year, this year. So if it didn't have those, it might do a little bit better. But you know, that's pretty good for a pinball machine from 1992. And then we had Miss Pac-Man, standing right over here by me, which turns 40 next month in May. And that made $869.75. And so not too bad. And that is kind of impressive given how, like, I think Arcade 1-Up has Miss Pac-Man, and you have it on easy to get on emulators or whatever. But of course, Miss Pac-Man is tied up in a big legal battle, but I won't get into that here. But you know, it's still a recognizable name, and so people still go for it. And then we have Mortal Kombat, or Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 by Midway, and that came out, what, 95? And that made $797, so a bit less than Street Fighter 2. They're actually right next to each other, but still did pretty good. And then, last but not least, on the best classics is Nintendo's Donkey Kong, which made $694. Now, when you look on forums, classic collector forums and whatnot, you might get the impression that Donkey Kong should be just blowing it off the wall. Everybody wants to be the next King of Kong. Well, I think that ship sailed a long time ago. The only time that I really see a bump where suddenly the classics are doing a lot better than they normally do week on week is when there's like a big movie that has something to do with classic gaming. Like when Wreck-It Ralph came out, even Pixels, where Pixels wasn't a great movie, but just the interest in classic games was out there in pop culture. It drove more people to come out and play the games. And so instead of a game making like $3 a week, it was starting to make 5 or 7. And so not a huge difference, but you know, it's nice when you get those boosts. Now for the best 5 classics in my other location is quite a difference, quite interesting, the change here. And I mentioned this in my video yesterday where I've been trying to get a feel for what people like between the different locations because it is very different. The tastes are different. And so it's been a challenge to figure out. So my best earning classic there was the Miss Pac-Man Galaga Pac-Man 25th Anniversary Combo Machine. You might have seen those before. It has those 3 games plus the fast versions on them. But it made $1,263.50. So very impressive at a quarter of play. Over the course of a year, my Street Fighter 2 Hyper Edition, not Turbo or X, it made $938 there. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles by Konami, the 1989 version, made $857. Although at one point in the year I did bring it down to this location because I took my newer Raw Thrills Ninja Turtles up there. Although now I'm kind of wondering if that was a wise decision because here it's actually been performing much, much worse. And so for some reason people really liked it up there. And then King of Fighters 98 by SNK made $316.75, quite a gap. And then the last best performer is Virtua Fighter 2 by Sega with $271.50. Now that game is actually, that would also be a little bit higher if it had been performing perfectly, but I've had a lot of problems with the monitor on that one where the screen keeps bouncing between bright and dark, and I've replaced almost all the components on the board and it's still doing that, so may give up and throw an LCD in there, which of course is another discussion to possibly have about CRT versus LCD and all that, but again, that's for a different video. But hopefully without those numbers, that provides a little bit of insight as to how the nostalgia hype doesn't necessarily translate into business and profitability and being able to pay my bills here. And so again, I still like having these games because I enjoy them. So yeah, there is a personal preference there. And for some of them, they do perform pretty well. When people come into an arcade, there may be certain games that they would expect to have. Like if you go to an arcade that's trying to be like mine with no ticket redemption games and no other attractions, you're going to expect things like Street Fighter, right? Or Miss Pac-Man or Galaga. Now here I do have a Galaga, but it's the newer Galaga Assault. It does well, but I don't consider it a retro game because technically it is newer. But anyways, I should also throw out, at this location I have, I think it's 62 games, and the other location it's somewhere around 40, I think. So there's also that to consider, but again, I'm still only charging 25 cents. I'm sure some operators will tell me, well, you need to jack those prices up and start charging 50 cents. Just, I don't know. I find it hard to charge 50 cents for Miss Pac-Man. And so maybe I'm stupid for doing that. I don't know. But I've got my newer games to really help pay the bills and the employees and myself and whatnot there. But I hope that provides a little bit of insight as to why you may not find a lot of retro games out there in newer facilities like Dave & Buster's. Like, I've been to some Dave & Buster's where they do have a couple of classic games. Like, they'll have Namco's classic collection games. Not this classic collection though. This is one from 1996 there that has the originals of Pac-Man, Rally X, Dig Dug, but it also has some arrangement versions which are pretty cool, but that's something else. But still, overall, the reason why when you go to most arcades out there that aren't trying to be a retrocade, where you'll see brand new stuff, because again, that's what people play, that's what makes money. And while these do all right, it's understandable why after 40 years you may not have people really playing them as much anymore. They're not going to be making as much money as they did when they first came out, for understandable reasons. They're older, people are familiar with them, tired of them, bored of them, whatnot. I used to have a guy that came in every day and played Miss Pac-Man, but after about 2 years or so, seems like he just got tired of it. And same with Donkey Kong. And so occasionally I come across customers like that where they will always play those games, but you can only do that for so long before you want to move on to something else too. But I'm still glad to offer these things, but just keep in mind, if you're, say, an indie game developer, trying to make a game that's like it's from 1981 is a huge challenge, because the reason why these can still make money is because they have the name. People have been familiar with them for 40-ish years, whereas a brand new indie game doesn't have that built-in fan base, doesn't have that name recognition, and so it may be very easy in an environment like this to get overlooked just because it tries to look old and people don't know it, and so they just think it's some obscure thing like Pitfall 2 that they've never heard about before. But hope that provides some good insight, some additional insight to you. And if there are any other topics you guys want me to get into and discuss, I'm more than happy to do so and provide that feedback from my experience running an arcade for 14-ish years now. And I'll see you on the next video, whether it's about arcade game design philosophy or something else. So thanks for watching. See you around.